The rain fell in sheets, turning the cobblestone alley into a river of shadows and reflections. I pressed myself against the cold brick wall, my designer dress torn at the shoulder, my bare feet bleeding from running through the streets of Rome. My body trembled violently, but I couldn't tell if it was from the November cold or the terror that had chased me for the last 3 hours. Behind me, I could still hear them searching, their voices echoing off ancient walls, promising things that made my stomach twist with nausea. I had run until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I found myself in this narrow passage between buildings that smelled of wet stone and something darker. When footsteps approached from the mouth of the alley, slow and deliberate, I knew I'd run out of places to hide. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The figure that emerged from the rain was massive, backlit by the distant street lamp, his silhouette sharp and commanding. I scrambled backward, my damaged dress catching on the rough wall, my voice breaking as I choked out the only defense I had left. "Don't touch me, please, don't touch me." The words came out as a sob, raw and desperate. My vision blurred with tears and rain, and I raised my hands in front of me as if that could somehow protect me from whatever came next. I had nothing left, no strength, no hope, just the animal instinct to beg for mercy from yet another stranger in the darkness. The man stopped moving. For a long moment, he simply stood there, the rain drumming against what I now saw was an expensive suit. Then he spoke, his voice low and calm, cutting through the chaos of my panic with unexpected gentleness. "Breathe," he said in Italian, the word firm but not harsh. "No one is going to hurt you." I couldn't process his words through the fog of fear. My back hit the dead end of the alley, and I realized with sinking horror that there was nowhere left to run. I slid down the wall until I was crouching, my arms wrapped around myself, my whole body shaking so violently my teeth chattered. The man took another step forward, and I flinched, a whimper escaping my throat. He stopped immediately, reading my terror with unsettling accuracy. Very slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal, he began to remove his coat. It was black, clearly custom-made, and probably cost more than most people earned in a month. The movement was deliberate, non-threatening, and when he held it out toward me, I stared at it without comprehension. "You're freezing," he said, his Italian accent refined, educated, nothing like the rough voices that had been hunting me through the streets. "And you're hurt. Let me help you." His words should have been reassuring, but nothing in the last 6 hours had prepared me to trust anyone. Still, my body was shutting down from cold and shock, and some primal part of my brain recognized that hypothermia would kill me long before I could figure out what to do next. When I didn't move to take the coat, he came closer, moving with a controlled precision that suggested either military training or something else, something more dangerous. I pressed myself harder against the wall, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Don't," I whispered, the word barely audible over the rain. He crouched down to my level, still maintaining distance, his dark eyes studying my face with an intensity that should have frightened me more, but somehow didn't. "I'm going to put this around your shoulders," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, but somehow still asking for permission. "I won't touch your skin. I won't restrain you. You can run if you want to, though I don't recommend it. Those men are still searching these streets." The mention of them, of the men who had done this to me, who had torn my world apart in the space of a single evening, sent a fresh wave of terror through my system. My eyes darted past him to the alley entrance, half expecting to see Marco's face, Salvatore's smile, the others who had turned a business dinner into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The stranger followed my gaze, and something in his expression changed. His jaw tightened, his eyes went cold, and when he looked back at me, I saw something lethal flickering beneath his careful composure. "How many?" he asked quietly. "How many men are looking for you?" I shook my head, unable to form words, unable to do anything but shake and sob and wish I could disappear into the stone behind me. He seemed to understand that I couldn't answer, that I was past the point of coherent communication. With movements that were surprisingly gentle for a man of his size, he draped the coat over my shoulders, careful not to touch me as promised, though his fingers came close enough that I felt the warmth radiating from his skin. The coat was heavy, lined with silk, and it smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something distinctly male that my traumatized brain couldn't quite identify. The warmth was immediate, shocking against my frozen skin, and I instinctively pulled it tighter around myself. "What's your name?" he asked, still crouching at my level, his voice maintaining that same calm, steady tone that somehow cut through the static of my panic. I stared at him, really seeing him for the first time. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair that was plastered to his head from the rain, strong features that were handsome in a harsh, uncompromising way, and eyes that held a dangerous intelligence. There was something about him that radiated power, the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. He wore his control like a second skin, and even soaked from the rain, even crouching in a filthy alley, he looked like someone who commanded rooms, someone who made decisions that affected lives. "Alicia," I finally managed, my voice hoarse from screaming, from running, from the things I couldn't let myself think about yet. "My name is Alicia." He nodded, as if my name was a piece of vital information he'd been waiting for. "Alicia," he repeated, testing it on his tongue. "I'm Luca Marchetti." The name meant nothing to me, though something in the way he said it suggested it should have. "Do you have somewhere safe to go? Family? Friends?" I shook my head, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. My apartment was compromised. They knew where I lived. My friends were all back in Milan, a 6-hour drive away. My family, what little remained of it, was across the ocean in New York, and I hadn't spoken to my father in 3 years, not since I'd refused to come home, insisted I could make it on my own in Europe, that I didn't need his protection or his money or his suffocating concern. "I have nowhere," I whispered, the admission breaking something in me. Everything I'd built in Rome, my career as a journalist, my independence, my carefully constructed life, it had all shattered in the space of an evening. One story, one investigation into the wrong people, one dinner invitation that had been a trap I'd walked into with my eyes wide open, convinced I was clever enough, careful enough, that nothing bad would happen to someone like me. Luca's expression shifted, something like recognition flickering across his features. He reached into his pocket, and I flinched again, but he only withdrew a phone, sleek and black. He pressed a button and spoke into it in rapid Italian. "Alessandro, I need the car at my location, now, and send the doctor to the estate. We'll have a guest who needs medical attention." He ended the call and returned the phone to his pocket, then stood, offering me his hand. I stared at it, at the strong fingers and the expensive watch on his wrist, at the gold ring on his right hand that caught the distant light. "I can't force you to trust me," he said, his voice still calm but edged with something harder now, something that suggested he was used to being obeyed. "But you have 2 choices, Alicia. You can come with me to somewhere warm and safe, where you can be treated by a doctor and get some rest. Or you can stay here in this alley and hope those men don't find you before morning. I know which option I'd choose." The logic was undeniable. even through my trauma-fogged brain. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't go home. I had no money, my purse was God knows where, probably still on the floor of that restaurant's private dining room where everything had gone so wrong. My phone was smashed. I'd thrown it at Marco's face when he'd grabbed me, had taken a savage satisfaction in seeing it shatter against his temple before I'd run. I had nothing and no one, and this stranger who'd wrapped me in his coat was offering me a lifeline I had no choice but to take. With trembling hands, I grasped his palm, and he pulled me to my feet with effortless strength. My legs nearly gave out immediately, pain shooting through my bare, cut feet, and his arm came around my waist to steady me, quick and impersonal. "Can you walk?" he asked, already knowing the answer from the way I swayed against him. Without waiting for my response, he swept me up into his arms, one arm beneath my knees, the other supporting my back. I tensed, every instinct screaming at me to fight, to flee, but my body had nothing left. "Don't touch me," I sobbed again, though I was already in his arms, already being carried out of the alley like I weighed nothing. "I won't hurt you," he said, and something in his voice made me believe him, or at least want to believe him. "I give you my word, Alicia. You're safe now." A sleek, black car materialized at the end of the alley, its engine purring, its windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. A man emerged from the driver's side, young and sharp-eyed, wearing a suit similar to Luca's. His gaze swept the street with professional efficiency before settling on us, his expression carefully neutral despite the scene we must have presented. "Any trouble?" Luca asked, adjusting his grip on me. "Two men, 3 blocks north," the driver reported, asking questions, showing a photo. My blood ran cold. They had a photo, which meant this wasn't over, meant they wouldn't stop looking. Luca's jaw tightened, and he moved toward the car with increased urgency. "Take us home. Use the secondary route. Make sure we're not followed." The interior of the car was warm and luxurious, all leather and dark wood. Luca deposited me carefully on the back seat, then slid in beside me, maintaining a careful distance even as the driver pulled away from the curb. I huddled in his coat, watching the streets of Rome blur past through the tinted windows, my mind struggling to process what was happening. I'd gone from one dangerous situation into another unknown one, trading the men I knew wanted to hurt me for a man whose intentions remained unclear. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice small and broken. "Somewhere they won't find you," Luca replied, his eyes on the passing streets, always watching, always alert. "My estate outside the city. It's private, secure. You'll be safe there while we figure out what to do next." The certainty in his voice, the casual way he said "we," as if my problems had become his problems, should have alarmed me. Instead, I felt a treacherous sense of relief. For the first time in hours, someone was taking control. Someone was making decisions, and I didn't have to think or plan or survive on my own anymore. "Why are you helping me?" The question came out before I could stop it. Luca turned to look at me fully, his dark eyes impossible to read in the dim interior of the car. "Because you needed help," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "And because I know what it looks like when someone is running from monsters." The drive took 30 minutes, leaving the historic center of Rome behind for the countryside beyond, where ancient villas hid behind high walls and cypress trees stood like sentinels against the night sky. The rain had lessened to a drizzle by the time we turned through massive iron gates that opened automatically, rolling up a long drive lined with lights. The estate that emerged from the darkness was breathtaking, a classical Italian villa with honey-colored stone, arched windows, and a fountain in the circular courtyard. It was the kind of place that spoke of old money, old power, and something else I couldn't quite name. Staff members appeared as the car stopped, but Luca waved them back with a gesture, carrying me himself up the stone steps and through massive wooden doors into a foyer that belonged in a museum. Marble floors, frescoed ceilings, antique furniture that probably cost more than my yearly salary. "Prepare the blue guest suite," Luca instructed a middle-aged woman who materialized from a side corridor. "And send Maria up. She'll help our guest with whatever she needs." The woman, dressed in elegant black, nodded without question, her eyes briefly meeting mine with what might have been sympathy before she disappeared to carry out his orders. Luca carried me up a sweeping staircase, down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and finally, into a bedroom that made me forget to breathe. It was huge, decorated in shades of blue and cream, with a 4-poster bed that could sleep 4 people, a sitting area with a fireplace, and windows that would have offered stunning views if it weren't full dark. An ensuite bathroom was visible through an open door, all marble and gold fixtures. "The doctor will be here within the hour," Luca said, setting me down carefully on the edge of the bed. "Maria will help you bathe and find you something clean to wear. There are locks on all the doors, and my men patrol the grounds. You're safe here, Alicia. I promise you that." I nodded numbly, unable to form words to express the confusion of emotions swirling through me. Gratitude, certainly, but also fear, and underneath it all, a strange awareness of the man standing before me, of his strength and his unexpected gentleness, of the way he'd given me his coat in the rain, of how his arms had felt around me, solid and warm and safe. "Thank you," I finally managed. "I don't know how to repay you for this." Something unreadable flickered across his face. "You don't owe me anything," he said firmly. "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning when you're stronger." He turned to leave, and panic surged through me at the thought of being alone, of being left in this beautiful, strange place with my thoughts and my memories of what had happened. "Wait," I called out, my voice breaking. He stopped in the doorway, looking back at me with those dark, intense eyes. "Will you tell me the truth about something?" I asked, needing to know, needing to understand what I'd stumbled into. "If I can," he said carefully. I pulled his coat tighter around myself, gathering courage. "You're not just a businessman, are you? Men don't move like you do, don't have security like this, don't make people obey with a single word unless there's something more." His expression didn't change, but I saw acknowledgement in his eyes, a recognition that I'd seen too much to be placated with comfortable lies. "No," he said simply, "I'm not just a businessman." The admission hung between us, heavy with implication. "What are you then?" I pressed, needing to know what I'd gotten myself into, what kind of man had rescued me from the rain. Luca was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight, weighing how much to tell me. Finally he said, "I'm someone who controls certain interests in Rome and beyond. Someone whose name carries weight in circles most people never encounter. Someone who can keep you safe from whoever is hunting you, but only if you trust me enough to tell me who they are." The careful phrasing didn't disguise the truth. I'd run from one dangerous situation straight into the arms of another kind of danger, one that wore expensive suits and lived in palatial estates and spoke in euphemisms about controlling interests and carrying weight. Mafia. The word hung unspoken between us, though neither of us said it aloud. In Italy, some things were understood without being named. "And if I don't trust you?" I asked, though we both knew I had no real choice. His expression softened slightly, and for just a moment, I saw past the cold authority to something more human underneath. Then you're free to leave tomorrow morning. I'll have my driver take you anywhere you want to go. But Alicia," his voice dropped lower, more serious, "whoever is looking for you tonight won't stop, and I'm offering you protection that few in this city could provide." Before I could respond, a soft knock announced Maria's arrival, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, carrying an armful of what looked like clean clothes and towels. Luca nodded to her, then looked at me one last time. "Rest," he said, and there was something almost gentle in the command. "We'll talk in the morning." He left, closing the door behind him, and I was alone with Maria, who began running a bath in the marble tub, adding oils that filled the air with the scent of lavender. She helped me out of my ruined dress, her face carefully neutral when she saw the bruises already forming on my arms, the scratches on my skin, the state of my feet. She didn't ask questions, just helped me into the bath with gentle efficiency, then left me to soak in water so hot it burned. I sat in that tub until the water grew cold, watching the dirt and blood and rain wash away, wishing I could wash away the memories as easily. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a robe softer than anything I'd ever worn, I found clean clothes laid out on the bed. Simple things, pajamas that were clearly expensive but comfortable, and when I checked the size, they fit perfectly, as if someone had known exactly what I would need. The doctor arrived as I was dressing, an older man with kind eyes who introduced himself as Dr. Russo. He examined my injuries with professional thoroughness, cleaned and bandaged my feet, gave me something for the pain and shock, and told me in a gentle voice that time would heal the rest. He didn't ask what had happened, didn't press for details, just did his job with quiet competence and left me with instructions to rest. Alone, finally, in the huge bedroom with its locked door and soft bed, I should have felt safe. Instead, I felt unmoored, adrift in a reality I couldn't quite grasp. Hours ago, I'd been a journalist attending what I thought was an interview dinner with potential sources for a story I was writing about corruption in Rome's construction industry. I'd been confident, prepared, armed with questions and a digital recorder hidden in my purse. But the men I'd met, Marco Santoro and his associates, they hadn't wanted to give me information. They'd wanted something else entirely, and when I'd tried to leave, when I'd realized the danger too late, they'd made it clear that I wasn't going anywhere. I'd only escaped because of luck and desperation, a broken wine bottle, a moment of chaos, and a mad sprint through the restaurant's kitchen and out into the rain. I climbed into the massive bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marco's face, felt his hands on me, heard his voice promising terrible things. My body jerked with phantom sensations. My heart raced, and panic clawed at my throat. I'd read about trauma, about assault, about PTSD in my work as a journalist, but nothing prepared you for experiencing it yourself, for the way your own mind turned against you, trapping you in an endless loop of fear and memory. I don't know how long I lay there, shaking and silent, before I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. They paused, and I held my breath, every muscle tensing. Then came a soft knock, so gentle it was barely audible. "Alessia?" Luca's voice came through the door, low and cautious. "I saw your light on. Are you all right?" I shouldn't have answered. I should have stayed silent, maintained the distance, kept this strange rescuer at arm's length, but the sound of his voice, calm and solid and real, cut through my panic in a way nothing else had. "No," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm not all right." There was a pause. Then, "May I come in? Just to talk. I'll stay by the door." I hesitated. weighing fear against the desperate need not to be alone with my thoughts. "Yes," I finally said. The lock clicked, the door opened, and Luca stepped inside, changed now from his wetsuit into dark pants and a simple shirt, barefoot, his hair still damp. True to his word, he stayed near the door, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, non-threatening, giving me space. "Dr. Russo said you were physically all right," he said quietly, "but that you'd been through something traumatic tonight. Do you want to talk about it?" I sat up in bed, pulling my knees to my chest, my arms wrapped around them. "I was stupid," I said, the words bitter. "I'm a journalist. I should have known better. Should have seen the signs, should have met them in a public place, should have told someone where I was going. But I was so focused on the story, on exposing corruption, on making a name for myself, that I ignored every instinct that told me something was wrong. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." Luca listened without interruption, his dark eyes never leaving my face. When I fell silent, he said gently, "Being ambitious doesn't make you stupid. Wanting to tell important stories doesn't make you responsible for what bad men choose to do. Whatever happened tonight, Alessia, it wasn't your fault." The words hit something deep inside me, something that had been bleeding since I'd run through those streets, the voice in my head that kept insisting I'd brought this on myself. Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and unstoppable. "They were going to. They wanted to." I couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't give voice to what I'd narrowly escaped. Luca's expression darkened, something cold and lethal flickering in his eyes. "But they didn't," he said, his voice hard now. "You got away. You survived. And I swear to you, Alicia, they won't get another chance." The promise in his words was absolute, carrying weight I didn't fully understand. "Why do you care?" I asked, wiping at my tears with the sleeve of my borrowed pajamas. "You don't know me. I'm nobody to you, just some girl you found in an alley. Why would you risk anything for me?" Luca was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, as if looking at something I couldn't see. When he spoke, his voice was softer, tinged with something that might have been old pain. "Because 5 years ago, I didn't help someone when I should have. And she died because of my inaction, because I was too focused on business, on maintaining neutrality, on not getting involved in affairs that weren't mine." His jaw tightened, grief and guilt etched into his features. "I won't make that mistake again. So when I see someone in danger, someone running for their life, I don't hesitate. I don't calculate the cost or the risk. I help, because that's the only way I can live with myself." The raw honesty of his confession stunned me. This powerful, dangerous man, who commanded with a word and inspired fear with a look, he was carrying his own scars, his own ghosts. We were more alike than I'd realized, both of us haunted by the past, both of us trying to survive in a world that was harder and more brutal than anyone else realized. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, "for whoever you lost." "Her name was Julia," Luca said, and I understood that he didn't talk about this often, that this was a confidence shared in the darkness, a truth he was giving me because I'd given him mine. She was 17, running from her father's men, trying to escape a marriage he'd arranged to consolidate power. She asked me for help, for sanctuary, and I said no. I was in a delicate position with her father's organization. Saying yes would have meant war. So I chose peace, chose strategy, chose my own interests. 2 days later, they found her body in the Tiber. The weight of that grief, that guilt, It explained so much about why he'd helped me tonight, why he hadn't hesitated, why he'd given me his coat and carried me to safety without asking for anything in return. "You're not going to let that happen to me," I said, and it wasn't a question. "No," he agreed, his eyes meeting mine across the room. "I'm not. Whatever those men want, whatever power they think they have, it ends now. You're under my protection, Alessia. That means something in this city. It means they'd have to go through me to get to you, and very few are that foolish." The certainty in his voice, the absolute authority, it should have frightened me. This was a man who spoke casually of war and power and going through him, a man whose protection came with implications I was only beginning to understand. But in that moment, exhausted and traumatized and more alone than I'd ever been, I felt only gratitude. "Get some sleep," Luca said, pushing off from the wall. "I'll be down the hall if you need anything. The staff has instructions to come immediately if you call." He moved toward the door, and again, that panic surged, the fear of being alone with my thoughts and memories. "Luca," I called out, stopping him. He turned back, waiting. Could you stay? Just until I fall asleep. I don't want to be alone right now. You can sit by the door. I just need to know someone's there." I expected him to refuse, to tell me that wasn't appropriate, that his protection didn't extend to being my personal guard through the night. Instead, he nodded without hesitation. "Of course," he said simply, and moved to the chair by the fireplace, settling into it with the ease of someone used to being comfortable anywhere. "I'll stay as long as you need." I lay back down, pulling the covers up, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt my racing heart begin to slow. The presence of another person, solid and real and vigilant. It quieted something in my traumatized brain. As my eyes grew heavy and sleep finally began to claim me, my last conscious thought was of the man across the room, dangerous and powerful and unexpectedly kind, who had wrapped me in his coat and promised to keep me safe. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know what price his protection might ultimately cost, but tonight, in this moment, I chose to believe him. I chose to trust that sometimes, when you're drowning in darkness, a stranger's hand, reaching down, isn't always pulling you deeper into danger. Sometimes, impossibly, it's pulling you toward light. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the scent of coffee. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was, my mind still foggy with sleep and the remnants of nightmares. Then it all came rushing back, the restaurant, Marco's hands, the rain, Luca's coat, wrapped around my shaking body. I sat up too quickly, my heart pounding, but the room was empty. The chair by the fireplace where Luca had sat last night was vacant, though a folded blanket on its arm suggested he'd stayed longer than just until I fell asleep. A soft knock preceded Maria's entrance, carrying a breakfast tray that filled the room with the aroma of fresh pastries and espresso. "Buongiorno, signorina," she said with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Mr. Marchetti asked me to bring you breakfast. He said to tell you he'll be in his study when you're ready to speak with him." I thanked her, my voice still rough from sleep and yesterday's screaming. After she left, I ate mechanically, barely tasting the food, despite its obvious quality. My mind was already racing ahead to what came next, to the conversation I needed to have with Luca, to the impossible situation I found myself in. The clothes Maria had left were casual but expensive, jeans that fit perfectly, a soft cashmere sweater in deep gray, even undergarments in exactly my size. The precision of it was both comforting and unsettling, evidence of Luca's resources, his ability to anticipate needs and fulfill them without being asked. I showered carefully, wincing as the hot water hit the cuts on my feet, then dressed and made my way downstairs, following the sound of voices to what I assumed was the study. The door was partially open, and I hesitated in the hallway, catching fragments of conversation in rapid Italian. Luca's voice, calm but edged with steel, and another man's voice I didn't recognize. Marco Santoro isn't just some petty criminal, Luca. He's connected to the Calabrian families, and he's claiming the girl belongs to him, that she stole something from him. He's asking for her return as a matter of honor. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't stolen anything, but the accusation didn't surprise me. Men like Marco didn't need truth. They just needed an excuse that would justify their actions to others in their world. Luca's response was immediate and uncompromising. Then Marco Santoro can choke on his honor. The woman is under my protection. That's the only claim that matters now. There was a pause. Then the other voice, more cautious now. You're willing to risk a war over a journalist? Someone who's not even part of our world? Luca, you need to think about the family, about the alliances we've worked years to build. The Calabrians have been useful partners. The sound of glass hitting wood, a tumbler set down hard. The alliance is built on my compromises, my strategies, my blood. So when I tell you that Alessia Russo stays here, protected, untouchable, that's not a debate, Alessandro. That's how it is. I shouldn't have been listening, should have announced my presence or walked away, but I was rooted to the spot, processing what I'd just heard. Marco was claiming I belonged to him, that I'd stolen from him, lies designed to justify hunting me, to make my death or disappearance acceptable in the twisted logic of organized crime. And Luca was defending me, risking relationships and alliances, willing to start a war over someone he'd known less than 24 hours. The weight of that hit me like a physical blow. I knocked, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. "Come in," Luca called, and I pushed the door open to find him standing behind a massive desk, his expression shifting from cold authority to something softer when he saw me. The other man in the room, Alessandro, was younger, perhaps Luca's age, with sharp features and calculating eyes that assessed me with frank curiosity. "Alessia," Luca said, moving around the desk toward me. "How are you feeling this morning?" The careful concern in his voice, the way his eyes searched my face for signs of trauma or distress, it made something in my chest tighten. "Better," I said, which was partially true. At least I was clean, fed, and no longer running for my life. "I heard what you were discussing. I'm sorry for causing problems with your business relationships." Alessandro made a sound that might have been a laugh or a scoff. Luca shot him a warning look before returning his attention to me. "You're not causing anything, Alessia. Marco Santoro is, and he's about to learn that his actions have consequences." He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. We need to talk about what happened last night, about who these men are and what they might do next." I sat, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. Alessandro remained standing by the window, watching us both with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Marco Santoro is connected to construction firms across Rome," I began, forcing myself to speak clearly despite the fear that wanted to strangle my voice. "I've been investigating corruption in city contracts for months, bribes, kickbacks, buildings that don't meet safety codes because inspectors are paid to look the other way. Marco's name kept appearing in my research, always at the center of the most lucrative deals." Luca listened intently, his expression darkening. "And you contacted him directly?" It wasn't an accusation, just a question, but I felt the weight of my own foolishness nonetheless. I thought I was being smart. I told him I wanted to write a profile piece, a feature on successful businessmen in Rome. He agreed to dinner at his restaurant, somewhere public. I thought I'd be safe." My voice cracked slightly. But when I arrived, he took me to a private room. There were others there, men I recognized from my research. And they made it clear the dinner wasn't about an interview. They knew I'd been investigating them, and they wanted to know who I'd told, who else was working on the story. Alessandro moved from the window, his interest clearly piqued. "Did you tell them?" I shook my head. "I told them nothing, but that's when Marco said it didn't matter, that I'd crossed a line by digging into their business, and that they were going to make an example of me. He said journalists needed to learn to respect boundaries, to understand that some stories shouldn't be told." The memory made my stomach turn. When I tried to leave, he grabbed me, told me I wasn't going anywhere, that by morning I'd understand my place. The rage that flashed across Luca's face was terrifying in its intensity, cold and absolute. "How did you escape?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "I broke a wine bottle," I said quietly. "Hit Marco with it. In the chaos, I ran. Through the kitchen, out the back, into the streets. I didn't stop running until I couldn't run anymore, and that's when I found the alley, where you found me." Luca nodded slowly, processing the information. "And your investigation? Do you have copies of your research somewhere? Evidence that could still be published?" The question made me pause. Did I? My apartment had a laptop, files, backup drives, with months of work. But going back there was impossible. They knew where I lived. "Everything's digital," I said, "backed up to a cloud server. But I can't access it without my laptop or phone, and I don't even know where my phone is anymore." Alessandro spoke for the first time since I'd entered. "It's probably already been destroyed. Standard procedure when someone runs. Eliminate the evidence trail." His clinical assessment of my situation, as if this were just business, made me want to scream. Luca must have seen something in my expression because he stood and moved to the window, his back to both of us. "Alessandro, I need you to reach out to our contacts in the Guardia di Finanza. Find out what investigation, if any, exists into Marco's operations, and I want to know everything about his current standing with the Calabrian families. If he's acting independently or with their blessing, that changes how we proceed." Alessandro nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Alone with Luca, the atmosphere in the room shifted, became more intimate, more charged with unspoken things. "You're planning something," I said, watching his reflection in the window. "Something dangerous." He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. "Marco Santoro put his hands on you, threatened you, hunted you through the streets of my city. That requires a response, Alicia. In my world, those things don't go unanswered." The possessive note in his voice when he said my city sent a shiver down my spine. "I don't want you to start a war because of me," I said, standing to face him properly. "I'm not worth that kind of risk." Luca crossed the distance between us in 3 strides, stopping close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "Don't say that," he said, his voice low and intense. "Don't tell me what you're worth. You risked your life to expose corruption, to tell stories that needed to be told. You survived something that would have broken other people. You're worth considerably more than Marco Santoro's entire miserable existence." The way he looked at me, as if I were something precious, something worth protecting at any cost, it made my heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "I don't understand you," I whispered. "Yesterday you were a stranger. Today you're willing to risk everything for me. Why?" His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing my cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth saving. Someone who reminds me why I got into this business in the first place, before it became about power and territory and endless compromises. You make me remember that there are still things worth fighting for, worth protecting. His eyes searched mine. And because I'm drawn to you in a way I haven't been drawn to anyone in years, that terrifies me almost as much as it compels me. The honesty of his confession stole my breath. This powerful, dangerous man was standing in his study, surrounded by the trappings of his criminal empire, and admitting vulnerability, admitting desire, admitting that I affected him. I should have stepped back, should have maintained distance, should have remembered that men like Luca Marchetti were dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with violence. But instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my eyes drifting to his lips. "This is insane," I breathed. "I barely know you. This shouldn't be happening." "I know," he agreed, but he didn't move away. But when has knowing something is unwise ever stopped anyone from wanting it? The truth of that hung between us, heavy with possibility. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment. He stepped back with visible reluctance, answering it in clipped Italian. His expression darkened as he listened, and when he ended the call, the softness was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "Marco has made his move," he said grimly. "He's filed a police report claiming you stole documents from his office, corporate espionage, and he's offered a reward for information leading to your location." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "He's using the police to find me?" Luca's jaw was tight. "He's using every resource he has. The police report gives him legitimate cover to search for you. The reward will have every opportunist and informant in Rome looking. And he's spreading word through the families that you're a thief and a liar, trying to discredit you before you can tell your story." The systematic destruction of my credibility, my safety, my life, it was happening with terrifying efficiency. "What do I do?" I asked, hating the helplessness in my voice. "You stay here, where you're protected," Luca said firmly. "My estate is secure, my men are loyal, and Marco can't touch you as long as you're under my roof. But we need to act quickly." He moved back to his desk, pulling out his phone again. "I'm going to have my people retrieve your laptop and research from your apartment before Marco's men can destroy it. And then, we're going to do something Marco won't expect." I watched him dial, issuing rapid instructions to whoever answered. When he hung up, I asked, "What won't he expect?" A dangerous smile curved Luca's lips. "We're going to publish your investigation, not through conventional channels. Marco will have those watched. But I have connections with certain independent journalists who can't be bought or intimidated. We'll leak the story, all of it, with every piece of evidence you've gathered. Once it's public, Marco can't silence you without confirming everything you've written. His only play becomes damage control, not elimination." The elegance of the strategy took a moment to sink in. "You're using exposure as protection." "Exactly," Luca said. "In the shadows, you're vulnerable, a problem that can be quietly eliminated. But in the light, with your story in the world, you become too visible to touch. Any harm that comes to you will only validate everything you've written. It was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure." "But what about the police report? The theft accusation?" Luca waved that away, dismissively. "I have lawyers who'll tie that up in court for years if necessary. Corporate espionage charges require proof, and Marco has none because you didn't actually steal anything. It's a nuisance, nothing more." The casual way he dismantled each threat, his confidence in his ability to protect me, it should have been reassuring. Instead, it made me acutely aware of the power he wielded, the machinery he could set in motion with a phone call. "You're used to fixing problems," I observed, "used to controlling situations." His eyes met mine, unflinching. It's what I do, Alicia. It's who I am. I see problems. I solve them. I see threats. I eliminate them. And when I see something I want to protect, I use every resource at my disposal to do so. Before I could respond, Alessandro returned, his expression grim. We have a problem. Marco's not working alone. The Calabrians have officially backed his claim to the girl. They're calling it a matter of family honor, saying she insulted one of their business partners and must answer for it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Luca's expression went cold and dangerous. They're making it official? Alessandro nodded. Matteo Calabrese himself called. He was very clear, very polite, but the message was obvious. They expect you to turn her over, or there will be consequences. I felt the blood drain from my face. The Calabrian families weren't just criminals. They were legends in the Italian underworld, powerful beyond measure, ruthless beyond comprehension. Luca going against them wasn't just risking a war, it was risking annihilation. Luca, I said quietly, my voice steady, despite the fear coursing through me. You can't fight them over me. No one can win against the Calabrians. You have to let me go. The look he gave me was fierce enough to make me step back. That's not an option. His voice was absolute, brooking no argument. But your family, your organization, I pressed, desperate to make him see reason. You'll lose everything. People will die. All because of me. Alessandro was watching us both, his expression unreadable. Luca moved toward me again, his hands gripping my shoulders, firm but not painful. Listen to me, Alicia. I've spent 15 years building what I have. I've made compromises, formed alliances, done things I'm not proud of, all in the name of power and security. But what's the point of having power if I can't use it to protect what matters? What's the point of security if I'm living in fear of men like Matteo Calabrese? His eyes burned with intensity. You asked me yesterday why I'm helping you. This is why. Because I'm tired of being the man who looks the other way, who calculates cost and benefit while people suffer. Julia died because I was too afraid to stand up for what was right. I won't let that happen again. I won't let them take you, Alicia. Not now. Not ever. The rawness of his declaration, the way his voice broke slightly on Julia's name, it shattered something inside me. This man, this powerful, dangerous man, he was choosing me over everything he'd built. He was willing to burn his entire world down rather than compromise again. Then tell me what to do, I said, my hands coming up to cover his where they rested on my shoulders. Tell me how to help, because I can't just hide while you fight my battles. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. You help by staying alive, by staying safe. Let me handle Marco and the Calabrians. That's my world, Alicia. You don't belong in it. But the words rang hollow because I was already in his world, whether I belonged there or not. The moment he'd wrapped his coat around me in that alley, the moment I'd accepted his protection, I'd crossed a threshold I could never uncross. The days that followed were tense, filled with waiting and planning. Luca's men retrieved my laptop and files, everything intact. I spent hours working with one of Luca's trusted contacts, a journalist named Sophia, who asked sharp questions and showed no fear of the powerful men my investigation would expose. The story was drafted, fact-checked, prepared for publication. All we needed was the right moment to release it. Meanwhile, Luca was engaged in a dangerous dance with the Calabrians, negotiating, stalling, using every bit of influence and strategy he possessed to buy time and create leverage. I watched him work from the sidelines, saw the weight of leadership on his shoulders, the impossible decisions he made with frightening calm. He was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, A man who could be gentle with me in private, but absolutely ruthless in his business dealings. And despite every rational voice in my head screaming warnings, I found myself falling for him. It happened in small moments. The way he checked on me every evening despite his exhaustion. The way his eyes softened when they found me. The careful distance he maintained even though I could see the desire in his gaze. He was giving me space, time to heal, never pushing despite the obvious attraction between us. One night, unable to sleep, I found him in his study, paperwork spread across his desk, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. He looked up when I entered, surprise and pleasure flickering across his features. "Alicia, it's past midnight. You should be resting." I moved into the room, drawn to him like gravity. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see Marco's face, feel his hands on me. I sank into the chair across from his desk. "How do you live with it? The violence, the threats, the constant danger. How do you sleep at night?" Luca set down his pen, giving me his full attention. "Honestly, most nights I don't sleep well. The things I've done, the choices I've made, they follow me into my dreams." He took a sip of whiskey. "But I live with it because I tell myself I'm creating something better, building power that can be used for more than just profit and violence. I protect people who can't protect themselves. I maintain order in a world that would descend into chaos without someone willing to make the hard choices." His eyes met mine. Whether that's true or just what I tell myself to justify everything, I'm not always sure. The honesty of his doubt, his willingness to question his own motivations, it made me see him as more than just the powerful Mafia boss. He was a man struggling with the same moral complexities as anyone, just with higher stakes and bloodier consequences. "I don't think you're evil," I said quietly. "I think you're trying to survive in a world that doesn't allow for simple morality." He smiled, but it was sad. "Careful, Alicia. You're starting to sound like someone who understands my world. That's dangerous." "Maybe I want to understand," I said, the words surprising me even as I spoke them. "Maybe I want to understand you." The atmosphere in the room shifted, became charged with possibility. Luca stood slowly, moving around the desk toward me. "You should stay far away from me," he said, even as he reached out to touch my face. "I'm going to destroy that understanding, that innocence. Being close to me will change you, and not necessarily for the better." I stood to meet him, closing the distance between us. "What if I don't want to stay away? What if I want to understand anyway?" His thumb traced my lower lip, his eyes dark with desire and something deeper, something that looked like longing. "Then God help us both," he whispered, before closing the remaining distance and kissing me. It wasn't like any kiss I'd experienced before. It was consuming, desperate, filled with all the tension and desire that had been building between us since that night in the rain. His hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, and I melted into him, my own hands gripping his shirt, anchoring myself to something solid in a world that had become terrifyingly unstable. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Luca rested his forehead against mine. "This is a mistake," he said, though his arms didn't release me. "You should walk away while you still can." I shook my head, my hands still fisted in his shirt. "I don't want to walk away. I don't want safe or simple anymore, Luca. I want this, whatever this is, for however long it lasts." The conflict in his eyes was visible, the war between wanting me and wanting to protect me, even from himself. Finally he nodded, a decision made. "Then stay," he said simply. "Stay with me, and let me show you what it means to be loved by a man like me." That night marked a turning point neither of us could reverse. I stayed in Luca's study until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, learning the man beneath the dangerous reputation. He told me about his childhood, about a father who'd built an empire on blood, and a mother who'd died too young, crushed by the weight of loving a man who lived in shadows. He told me about the first time he'd killed someone, at 19, to protect his younger sister from a business rival's revenge. He told me about the burden of leadership, how every decision he made rippled outward, affecting hundreds of lives in ways he couldn't always predict or control. And I told him things I'd never told anyone, about my own father's death when I was 15, about how I'd watched cancer slowly steal him away, how I'd promised him I'd be brave, that I'd tell the truth no matter the cost. I told him about the guilt I carried for leaving my mother alone in New York to chase stories across Europe, about how journalism had become both my purpose and my escape from grief. We laid ourselves bare in that study, two damaged people finding unexpected connection in the wreckage of our respective lives. When morning light finally filtered through the windows, Luca kissed me once more, gentle and reverent, before reluctantly letting me go to get some rest. But as I climbed the stairs to my room, I knew that sleep would be impossible. Everything had changed. The careful distance we'd maintained had collapsed, and now we were hurtling towards something neither of us could control. The question wasn't whether we'd crash, but whether we'd survive the impact. The storm broke 3 days later. Sophia called early in the morning, her voice tight with urgency. The story was ready to publish, fact-checked and legally vetted, explosive enough to bring down half of Rome's construction industry. But she'd received a visitor the night before, a man who'd politely suggested that publishing the story would be bad for her health. The threat was clear. Marco knew what we were planning, and he was moving to stop it. Luca's response was immediate and decisive. We published everything that afternoon, not through one outlet, but through 6 simultaneously, domestic and international, impossible to suppress or contain. Within hours, the story exploded across Italian media. Marco Santoro's name was everywhere, along with documentation of bribes, falsified inspection reports, and buildings that stood as death traps waiting to collapse. The evidence was irrefutable, and the public outcry was immediate. Prosecutors announced investigations. Politicians who'd been in Marco's pockets scrambled to distance themselves, and suddenly the man who'd hunted me through the streets was fighting for his own survival. But victory came with a price I hadn't anticipated. That evening, as I watched the news coverage with something like vindication burning in my chest, Alessandro appeared in the doorway of the sitting room where I'd been camped. His expression was grave, and my stomach immediately knotted with dread. "Where's Luca?" I asked, standing quickly. Alessandro's jaw was tight. "Dealing with the Calabrians. They've called a meeting tonight. They're demanding he answer for his defiance, for protecting you, for the embarrassment Marco's exposure has brought to their business interests." The blood drained from my face. "He can't go. It's a trap. They'll kill him." "He knows that," Alessandro said quietly. "But if he doesn't go, if he refuses to answer their summons, it's a declaration of war. And we're not strong enough to survive that war, Alessia. The Calabrians have resources we can't match, alliances across Europe. They'll dismantle everything Luca's built, and they'll kill everyone loyal to him as a lesson to others who might think about defying them." The impossible choice laid bare: go to his probable death, or refuse and guarantee the death of everyone who depended on him. "There has to be another way," I said desperately. "There has to be something we can do." Alessandro's expression was sad, almost pitying. Sometimes there is no other way. Sometimes the only choice is how you face what's coming. He moved toward the door, then paused. He asked me to keep you safe. Whatever happens tonight, he's arranged for you to leave Italy if necessary. New identity, new life, somewhere they'll never find you. The words hit like a physical blow. Luca was preparing for his own death, making arrangements to ensure I survived him. No, I said, the word ringing with absolute certainty. I'm not running, and I'm not letting him go to that meeting alone. Alessandro shook his head. You don't have a choice. Luca's orders were clear. You stay here, protected, and if he doesn't return by dawn, we get you out of the country. But he was wrong. I did have a choice. I'd spent my entire adult life choosing truth over safety, choosing to speak when silence would have been easier. I wasn't about to stop now, not when the man I'd fallen in love with was walking into a trap because of me. I waited until Alessandro left, then moved quickly, changing into dark clothes, pulling my hair back, thinking frantically about what I could do, how I could help. The answer came to me with crystalline clarity. Marco was the key, the reason the Calabrians were demanding Luca answer for his defiance. Without Marco's accusations, without his claims of honor and theft, the entire justification for their stance collapsed. If Marco recanted, if he publicly withdrew his accusations against me, the Calabrians would have no face-saving reason to continue their pressure on Luca. They could step back, blame Marco for the misunderstanding, and everyone could move forward. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. Finding Marco wasn't difficult. After the story broke, he'd gone to ground in one of his properties, a luxury apartment building in central Rome that he owned through a shell company. The address was in my research files, part of the evidence of his hidden assets. Getting there was harder. I had to slip past Luca's security, steal a car from the estate's garage, and drive through the night with my heart pounding and my hands shaking on the wheel. By the time I arrived at Marco's building, dawn was approaching, and I knew I was running out of time. The lobby was empty, the doorman absent or paid to disappear. I took the elevator to the penthouse, my pulse thundering in my ears, my mind racing through what I would say, how I would convince him. When I knocked on his door, it swung open almost immediately, as if he'd been expecting someone. Marco stood there, his face still bearing marks from our last encounter, a cut on his temple, bruising around his eye. When he saw me, shock flickered across his features, followed quickly by something darker, more predatory. "Alessia Russo," he said, my name dripping with venom. "Coming back to me of your own accord. How convenient." I forced myself to stand straight, to meet his gaze without flinching. "I came to make a deal." His laugh was ugly, bitter. "You destroyed my business, my reputation, everything I built. And you think you can make a deal with me? You think I want anything from you except to watch you suffer?" I swallowed my fear, my disgust, everything except the desperate need to save Luca. "I think you're a survivor, Marco. I think you're smart enough to know that your best chance now is to cut your losses, recant your accusations against me, and disappear before the prosecutors arrest you. The Calabrians are using you as an excuse to move against Luca Marchetti. But if you withdraw your claims, they have no justification. You'd be doing yourself a favor." Marco's eyes narrowed, calculating. "And what do I get in return for this favor?" I'd known this moment would come, known what he'd ask for. "Me," I said, the word tasting like ash. "I'll go with you. Disappear, whatever you want. Just call off the Calabrians, save Luca, and I'm yours." The offer hung between us, and I saw the temptation in his eyes, the twisted satisfaction of having me surrender myself to him. But then his expression shifted, became cruel and knowing. "You love him," he said, almost wonderingly. "The Mafia boss, you actually love him. How pathetic." Before I could respond, he grabbed my arm, his grip bruising, pulling me into the apartment. The door slammed shut behind us, and panic surged through me as I realized my mistake. I'd walked into his trap willingly, and now I was at his mercy. "You stupid girl," Marco hissed, his face inches from mine. "Did you really think I'd let you negotiate? That I'd give up my leverage for your empty promises?" His other hand tangled in my hair, yanking my head back. "You're going to call Marchetti. You're going to tell him that if he doesn't turn over his territory to the Calabrians, I'll kill you slowly, and I'll make sure he hears every scream." The cold press of metal against my ribs made me gasp. A knife, small but lethally sharp. "Make the call," Marco demanded, shoving a phone into my free hand. My mind raced, looking for escape, for advantage, for anything that could turn this around. But there was nothing. Just Marco's breath hot against my face, and the knife biting through my shirt to touch skin. With shaking hands, I dialed Luca's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice sharp with worry. "Alessia? Where are you? Alessandro said you disappeared, that the car is gone." "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. "I tried to help, but I made it worse. I'm at Marco's apartment, and he wants you to surrender to the Calabrians, or he'll kill me." The silence on the other end was absolute, terrifying. Then, Luca's voice, cold as death. "Put him on the phone." Marco took the phone, his smile vicious. "Marchetti, here's how this works. You have 1 hour to contact Matteo Calabrese and agree to his terms. Territory, assets, everything. You surrender it all, or the girl dies, and I promise you'll receive pieces of her for months." His grip on me tightened. "And before you think about storming this place, I have men throughout the building. You can't reach me before I kill her." He listened to whatever Luca said, his smile growing wider. "I'm glad we understand each other. 1 hour, Marchetti. Don't be late." He ended the call and threw the phone aside, then dragged me deeper into the apartment, into a bedroom where he secured my hands to the radiator with plastic zip ties. "Now we wait," he said, crouching in front of me. "And while we wait, I'm going to enjoy watching you realize that your precious Mafia boss can't save you, that all your bravery and investigation and self-righteousness accomplished nothing except getting people killed." Time became elastic, stretching, contracting as I sat there, bound and helpless, watching Marco pace and check his phone, waiting for Luca's surrender. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, all the choices that had brought me to Rome, to that restaurant, to Luca's arms. I thought about my father's death, about the promise I'd made to always seek truth, and wondered if this was the cost of that promise. But mostly, I thought about Luca, about his dark eyes and unexpected gentleness, about the way he'd wrapped his coat around me in the rain, about the kiss we'd shared that had felt like coming home. I couldn't let him surrender, couldn't let him sacrifice everything he'd built for me. But tied and weaponless, there was nothing I could do except wait and pray for a miracle. The miracle came in the form of shattering glass and chaos. The penthouse window exploded inward, and dark shapes swung through on ropes, moving with military precision. Marco barely had time to react before he was on the ground, disarmed, 3 men in tactical gear pinning him with brutal efficiency. And then, Luca was there, stepping through the broken window like an avenging angel, his suit immaculate despite the violence, his eyes finding mine with laser focus. He crossed to me in 3 strides, producing a knife and cutting through the zip ties with swift, efficient movements. His hands cupped my face, checking for injuries, his touch gentle despite the fury burning in his eyes. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" I shook my head, unable to form words, overwhelmed by relief and love and the sheer improbability of survival. Luca pulled me against his chest, his arms wrapping around me like bands of steel, and for a moment the world narrowed to just his heartbeat against my ear, solid and real and alive. "Take him," Luca ordered without releasing me, and his men dragged Marco from the room, his protests and threats fading into the distance. When we were alone, Luca pulled back just enough to look at me, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Fear, raw and undisguised. "When I got your call, when I heard his voice threatening you, I felt something break inside me," he said, his voice rough. "The thought of losing you, of being too late, it terrified me more than anything ever has. More than death, more than losing everything I've built. You've become the center of my world, Alicia, and I don't know what that means for either of us." I reached up to touch his face, feeling the tension in his jaw, the rapid pulse at his throat. "It means we're in this together now. No more running, no more protecting me by pushing me away. If you're facing the Calabrians, then we face them together." Something like hope flickered in his eyes, warring with fear. "The Calabrians still expect me at their meeting. This doesn't change that." I nodded, accepting the reality. "Then we find another way. We have Marco now. We have leverage. Make him confess, clear both our names, remove the excuse the Calabrians are using." Luca was quiet for a long moment, thinking, calculating. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in rapid Italian to Matteo Calabrese himself. The conversation was tense, but Luca's voice never wavered, never showed weakness. He explained that Marco had confessed to fabricating accusations against me, that he'd acted independently in violation of protocols, that he'd brought shame to everyone associated with him. He offered Marco's arrest and cooperation with authorities as restitution, a public cleaning of house that would satisfy honor without requiring bloodshed. The pause that followed seemed to last forever. Then, Luca's shoulders relaxed fractionally, and I knew we'd won. The Calabrians had accepted, saving face by punishing Marco for his dishonor, rather than pushing for war over a journalist who'd been telling the truth all along. The meeting was canceled, the crisis averted, and we'd survived. But survival came with scars and consequences neither of us could ignore. In the days that followed, as Marco was handed over to authorities and my story was validated by his confession, as the prosecutors moved forward with cases that would reshape Rome's power structure, Luca and I had to face the reality of what came next. His world had been shaken, alliances questioned, his reputation for absolute control damaged by the very public near war over me. Some of his associates whispered that he'd gone soft, that love had made him weak, that a leader who'd risk everything for a woman couldn't be trusted to lead. We talked about it late one night in his study, the same room where we'd first kissed, where we'd first admitted what was growing between us. "I could rebuild what I had," Luca said, staring into his whiskey glass. "Reassert control. Prove to them that you weren't a weakness, but a strategic choice. I could make them forget, in time." He looked up at me, his eyes holding mine. "Or I could walk away, sell my interests, distribute power to trusted lieutenants, and build a different life. A life where I'm not constantly calculating threats and managing violence, where loving you doesn't put you in danger every single day." The choice he was offering, the sacrifice he was willing to make, it staggered me. "Luca, you can't give up everything you've built for me. That's not fair to either of us." He stood and moved to where I sat on the couch, kneeling before me the way he had that first morning, taking my hands in his. "Alicia, I've spent 15 years building an empire I thought mattered. But these past weeks with you have shown me something I'd forgotten, that power without purpose is meaningless. That control without connection is just another kind of prison." His grip tightened. "You make me want to be better, to build something that matters for reasons beyond profit and influence. I want a life with you, a real life, not stolen moments between crises. And that's not possible in my world." Tears spilled down my cheeks as I pulled him up to sit beside me. "Then we build something new," I said. "Not your world or my world, but something we create together. You don't have to give up your power, Luca. You just have to use it differently, for protection instead of profit, for justice instead of control. We both have skills, resources, connections. Imagine what we could do if we combined them." The idea took root between us, growing with possibility. Luca could provide security, resources, and knowledge of how power operated in shadows. I could provide truth, investigation, and a journalist's instinct for uncovering corruption. Together, we could be something neither of us could be alone. The transition took months. Luca restructured his organization, delegating day-to-day operations to trusted people while maintaining ultimate authority. He used his influence differently, protecting vulnerable people instead of just profitable ones, disrupting trafficking networks, and using information I uncovered to bring down people who thought themselves untouchable. And I continued writing, but now with protection that let me pursue bigger stories, more dangerous truths, knowing Luca would always be there to guard my back. We married quietly 6 months after that terrible night in Marco's apartment. Just us and a handful of trusted friends in a small chapel outside Rome. No white dress, no elaborate ceremony, just simple vows that meant everything. I promised to stand beside him in darkness and light, to tell him truth when he needed it, to be his conscience when violence seemed like the easier path. He promised to protect me, to honor the courage that had brought us together, to build something worthy of the sacrifice we'd both made. The life we built together wasn't easy. There were still threats, still moments of danger when my investigations touched the wrong people or Luca's past came calling. But we faced them together, neither of us alone anymore, both of us stronger for the partnership we'd forged in fire and fear. And slowly, gradually, we built something that felt like redemption, taking the darkness we'd both known and transforming it into something that could heal instead of harm. A year to the day, after Luca had found me in that rain-soaked alley, we returned to the spot. It was different in daylight, just a narrow passage between buildings, unremarkable and forgettable. But standing there with his arms around me, I remembered the girl I'd been that night, terrified and broken and certain she would die. That girl couldn't have imagined this, standing in the same place wrapped in love instead of fear, building a future instead of just surviving the present. "Do you regret it?" Luca asked quietly, his chin resting on top of my head. "All the danger, the fear, everything that's happened because of me?" I turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd saved me and then let me save him in return, who'd shown me that love could exist even in the darkest places, that redemption was possible even for those who'd done terrible things. "Not for a second," I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. "You're my home now, Luca Marchetti, my shelter from the rain." He kissed me there, in that alley where our story began, and I tasted salt from tears I hadn't realized I was crying. We'd survived the storm, survived each other, and built something beautiful from the wreckage. It wasn't the life I'd planned, wasn't what I'd imagined when I'd come to Rome, chasing stories and truth. But it was real, and it was ours, and in the end, that was worth every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of terror that had led us here. Because some stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with hard-won, fiercely protected happiness that knows exactly what it cost and chooses it anyway. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.